Maybe I should hide behind here, huh? These aren't giveaways. I just wanted to let you know some of the source material that I'm using for this. And I'll talk about that. Well, wow, those lights are bright. Bald men don't like bright lights. It's the spot that follows us as we walk around. So I'll try not to blind any of you with the glare. But I want to welcome you to Air University. Those of you who are with the foundation, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate all that you do for us, and we are proud to have you as our partners. Thank you so much for all that you do for our university. I want to thank my fellow colleagues and the faculty. This is a first of, I hope, a continuing array of opportunities for us to share some of our research and some of the things that we've been doing. And lastly, to all of the folks out there in TV land who are tuning in, we know how busy you are, and we know what you're doing for your Air Force and for your nation. And we just want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all that you do in service to our nation and its national security. With that, I'd like to get started. My presentation today is on the essential weapon of the warfighter, and that, of course, is the human mind, how we think. We need to think better than we've thought in the past. Our world is getting increasingly complex, and we need to increase the complexity of our thinking to meet the challenges that we face. So in a session that's dedicated to the mind of the warfighter, I think it's particularly appropriate that I start off with metacognition. And I'm going to get to that transformational leadership, that transformational innovation in education that General Fadok mentioned as I go through this presentation. Malcolm Forbes gave us insight into a particularly effective approach for developing people when he wrote, "Education's purpose is to replace an empty mind with an open mind." Think about that. Our purpose in education is not just to fill people with facts and figures. We don't want them just to walk out and regurgitate. They need new solutions to new problems that they're going to encounter. They need to be prepared for the unknown. And one of the ways that we do that is through developing their cognitive complexity. You've seen this quote before: "The army that is outthought will almost always be outfought, no matter how bravely or skillfully its soldiers perform on the battlefield." A lot of us have used that line, outthought and outfought, in our own instruction. We've used it in some of our publications too. In his book, Over Our Heads, Harvard professor Robert Kagan argued that most adults face challenges and situations that are beyond their developmental understanding. Most adults have not fully developed their cognitive, moral, or social development needed to make sense of an increasingly complex world. In fact, Kagan argues this is the reason why so many leaders find themselves in situations where they're going to fail. Think about that. It's a matter of thinking. And too often that we as leaders look at our people and say, oh, well, Matthew's not strong enough as a decision maker, or Matthew's not brave enough in this, when we possibly should be saying, Matthew hasn't been developed sufficiently to be decisive. Matthew hasn't been developed sufficiently. And that opens the door for us as people committed to the development of airmen for our future, gives us kind of a way that we can go to try to help the problem. Most development programs we have today are competency-based, and they focus on specific knowledge and skills, putting that information in. Now, Kagan will argue to you that what we're doing is we take a glass and we put information and knowledge in. And when the glass is full, we pour some out and we pour more in. And his argument is, maybe it's time for bigger glasses. Maybe it's time for bigger containers. Maybe instead of just changing the software, we need to re-image the entire computer. And that's where he gets to his cognitive levels. There's two types of developmental levels. The first is a horizontal development, as you can see on the slide. This is where we expand with those capabilities, those competencies, those skills. We learn more skills. And typically we think, if I need to know something, I take a class and then I know it. But does it really change me? Does it change my perspective? This is an important consideration as we're developing educational programs here at Air University. A lot of people who look at a university have an idea that this is the fix to their problems. And we have to fight back and say, yes, it's partially that, but we have to do so much more. We have to go in different directions. There's a counter-competency movement in education today. It started off with George Hollenbeck out at USC in 2003, and he started this movement when he wrote this: "Evidence abounds that much of leadership development has failed to meet expectations. Unless we change our assumptions and think differently about the developmental process, we'll continue to find too few leaders who can execute our strategies, and the competence of those available leaders will too often be in question. The competency model of the present, proposing as it does a single set of competencies that account for success, must be supplemented with a developmental model based on leadership challenges rather than on specific traits and competencies. Leader performance must focus on what gets done rather than on specific ways of doing it or on what competencies or characteristics our leaders possess. In turn, leadership development must be viewed as meeting performance challenges essential to our strategies, with senior leaders making developmental decisions much as they make decisions on the job and in the battle space. Think of it another way. The post-competency movement is arguing this, that we can make better bricks. We can make the best bricks in the world. And with those bricks, we might make an outhouse, or we might make a cathedral. So we need to make the best bricks, but we also need to focus on that mind that can create the structures we need for tomorrow. How do I employ the competencies I've been given, the knowledges and the skills, to meet the challenges of our times? And this is where I would like to go. Now, Bob Kagan, in his book, Immunity to Change, and several other books that he's writing with Lisa Leahy, writes about stages of vertical development. And it's pretty exciting in what he's writing. John McGree and Kerry Rhodes argued in their book, Transforming Your Leadership, organizations have grown skilled at developing individual leader competencies, but mostly have ignored the challenges of transforming their leader's mindset from one level to the next. Today's horizontal development within a mindset must give way to the vertical development of bigger minds. Vertical leadership development challenges that existing notion that it's a progression of knowledge and skills, and it says that you have to develop new ways of looking at the world. You have to have ideas that can change the mindset and perspective. You have to have a new awareness of your world. And critical to this is Bob Kagan's idea of subject and object. We are subject to so many things that we don't even know. You're subject to your value structure. You're subject to your prejudices. You're subject to your preferences. You're subject to the things you believe about your world, which may or may not be true. And Kagan says, like a backpack filled with gear, we're weighed down by those things to which we're subject. And he says as we move in cognitive complexity, we reach into our backpack and we pull these things out and we analyze them and they become object. The move from subject to object is the growth of the individual in cognitive complexity. Take it, for example, let's say that you're a young child and you're raised to have a prejudice. Maybe it's a racial prejudice, maybe it's a religious prejudice, maybe it's a prejudice that has to do with economic status, whatever. And you grow up and you have this prejudice. Throughout your growth period, you're going to start making decisions. But at some point, as you become an adult and you become more cognitive complex, you reach back into that backpack and you pull out the weight of that prejudice and you say, is this right? Is this moral? Is this who I want to be? And you recraft that, and maybe it's something that you can dispose of. Maybe it doesn't need to be on your backpack anymore. Maybe you can think a different way. Mankind has made this journey. We understand that. There was a time when man thought the world was flat. If you sailed too far, you went over the edge, or maybe you got eaten by a sea serpent. That was, the level of cognitive complexity was fairly low in that regard. But, we compensated by staying very near the shore, not going too far out, not going where the rocks and the monsters lie. But as we started to traverse, we started to recreate and reimagine our world. And so before we had spacecraft, we knew the world was round. We didn't have to go out and see it. We had imagined, we'd created a new cognitive complexity, a new level of development, and that's the type of development we're talking about when we talk about Kagan's 5 levels. The first of Kagan's 5 levels, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, is the impulsive mind. Now, I have to tell you that it's mostly for infants and people below 7 years old, but we exist in every cognitive level that is below the level we're operating today. That means that if you're at the very top level, sometimes you're going to be impulsive. Sometimes you, like that infant, want the cookie, and the cookie will drive you. But to give you a great example, if I say to my 1-year-old grandson, here's a cookie, hold on to that cookie until you're hungry, and then eat that cookie. How long will my 1-year-old grandson wait before he eats the cookie? That long. He's going to devour that cookie because it's an immediate impulse. The impulses drive behavior, and that person cannot control the impulses. This sometimes happens on the battle space. You'll find a an opponent who is acting impulsively, you can lay out something that looks like bait to them, and they go and they fall into your trap because they're acting on the impulse. Maybe they want glory, maybe they want status, maybe they think that the target is so valuable that they're willing to risk everything, and they do. So you can use that impulsive behavior against an adversary. Most people don't operate at this level, though. Most people operate at higher levels. 13% of adults operate at a self-sovereign level. These people tend to see just one perspective, and their perspective tends to be their own perspective. They determine what is right and wrong by what they need. They understand everything in terms of their own personal needs, their own personal wants. They don't have a lot of empathy for others. They tend to react based just on themselves. It's a very, very ego-driven type of mentality. And this isn't a term that Kagan uses. This is actually a term that Berger uses. If you're new to this theory, Berger's book, Changes on the Job, is a little more attainable. Kagan sent the first book to his dad. His dad said, "Bob, I read your book. I didn't understand a word of it." So Berger wrote a second book and tries to make it a little bit easier for Kagan's father. She uses self-sovereign. It kind of fits the description better. Kagan uses the instrumental mind. But this is an ego-driven person. And a lot of the toxic leaders that we encounter in leadership discussions and leadership theory are operating at this level. It's very, very personal. It's very about their status. It's very about dig me. And if you get in my way, by gosh, I will crush you because you are now opposing me. And they see the world as a for me or against me structure. They find abstract ideas extraordinarily challenging. And when presented with abstract ideas, they will often get angry at the person presenting them. You're confusing me. You are doing this to me. Socialized mind. Approximately 46% of adults operate at the socialized level. And probably through the industrial age, this was sufficient. This is people who adopt for their value structures, their beliefs, their mores, the decisions of a group they trust. You see this really strongly in teenagers. If you have raised in adolescence, you have been to the battle space and back, you understand what this is. This is the group that's led by their peers. If Tommy has an iPhone, by gosh, I need an iPhone. If Jamie gets to go out till 11 o'clock on a weeknight, by gosh, I need to go out till 11 o'clock on a weeknight. They find trusted others and they adapt their value structures. They imprint those value structures. We use this at times. We try to indoctrinate people to think a certain way, to be a certain way, to identify themselves in a certain group so that they will possess and execute based on that group's mores, values. But for our leaders, we have to go higher. Socialized-minded leaders are great for repetitive tasks that don't require a lot of innovation. But if we're going to be innovative, if we're going to face solutions, create solutions to problems we've never faced before, we're going to have to go higher. For these people, right action is determined by expertise, and they decide who the experts are. They will say, they will fall back into a position, I don't know, I'm going to ask my mentor, my guide, my scoutmaster, my coach, whoever it is who's guiding them in their lives. You'll see this a lot in young people who are still very much influenced by what their parents think. They'll call their parents and they'll find out what their parents' opinion is, and then they'll broadcast that opinion as their own. They are devoted to something larger than themselves, though. The group identity becomes so much more important than their personal identity. That's important to know because if you're dealing with one of these people, you have to find out the group identification they have, and then you're going to have to work through that group identification to pull them out of this level, to move them to a higher level. It looks like these people would always be moral, right? They would always do the right thing because they identify with groups. Wrong. If they identify with a group that's immoral, they will be immoral. If they become part of a group that wants to behead people for public recognition, they will behead people for public recognition. They become the group, and the group operates as kind of a hive mentality. Socialized mindset leaders are extraordinarily interesting to work with, work for, but in our Air Force, we have got to move our leadership higher. The next level is the self-authored mind. Approximately 41% of all adults are at the self-authored mind, and you're going to know the self-authored mind when I describe it to you because, frankly, that is our vision of how adults should act. They see the world through their own created perspective. They have considered the ideas of others, and they have pushed those ideas, and they're balancing those around, and they're trying to weigh all those constituencies to make sure that they're representative. But ultimately, they come out with the right action. They decide their course. If they are on the right course, these are people we like to follow. These are people we feel that we can gain their trust, we can have a mutual trusting relationship, and this is great. They own their own work, they take responsibility, they are accountable, they are adult. They follow their internal compass. If their internal compass is set good to good morals and good values, by gosh, they'll do the right thing. And if it's not, they'll do the wrong thing. And they'll do it even if they get advice, don't do that. They tend to be leaders in organizations, and we tend to be very comfortable with them. The problem, sometimes they become very, very predictable. And in military terms, that can be very, very dangerous. You'll probably remember the Battle of Midway when Yamamoto had a plan to take the island of Midway. He had a plan based on Bull Halsey commanding those aircraft carriers. He knew Halsey. He knew how Halsey would act. He knew what Halsey would do. He knew Halsey was self-authored and would break the Navy doctrine to do a certain thing in a certain way, and Yamamoto was prepared to destroy him at Midway. And then Halsey got sick, and Ray Spruance stepped in. And Ray Spruance, if you read his book, he's far at a higher level. Everything is shades of gray. He's reacting to his environment. Yamamoto's plan that set the trap actually trapped Yamamoto, and Spruance is victorious. It's fascinating to see as you start to go through these mental levels, to look at the leaders we have and how they respond in time. So how do we get from the self-authored to the next level? We have to challenge these people to think. We have to pull the things out of their backpack and make them consider that. What do you know? What do you think is truth about air power? What do you think is truth about the way the world works? How do you defeat on the battle space an idea or a belief structure? It's not just going to be kinetic, it's going to have to be something more. We need to pull them to those higher levels of thinking. At the highest level, Kagan argues, they've reached a self-transformational stage. And this is exactly what General Fadok was talking about with transformational education. To bring people together in these educational environments where they start to take in the whole world. It becomes part of their perspective. They can hold differing ideas simultaneously, and it doesn't hurt their heads. It doesn't cause them distress. They understand these are very, very complex problems. So when they're faced with complex social issues like the death penalty or abortion or assisted suicide, they can understand all the constituencies and all the advocacies that are involved in that. Their right action, how they determine right from wrong, it's always being co-created and it's constantly being adapted. They're constantly thinking about this. They even evaluate the screens that they use to think about this. Maybe my value structure is wrong. Maybe the decision I'm reaching for the filters I'm reaching is wrong. They're constantly open. These people will change their minds. They will change their minds, but you can trust that what they're doing is based on this fantastic grasp of the holistic situation. They understand the layers, they understand the shades of gray, and they play with multiple systems and multiple paradoxes simultaneously. They're fun to be around. They think differently. How do we grow? We grow by changing perspectives. We grow by forcing people to take those things to which they are subject and to make them object and to study them. We consider others' perspectives. We have to show people what those perspectives are. They have to be in touch with those constituencies. They have to step into frustration. They have to go where it is uncomfortable to go. In uncertainty, a lot of people get troubled and they stop. This person bravely goes on. They live with that uncertainty and they pull those things together and they make meaning out of it. They can pursue a cause. This is interesting because a lot of these people will get to a level and suddenly they feel that the fire is out of their belly. They're at this stage where they are one with everything and they're saying, I've got to go out and refine it. And a lot of times they leave and they go out to try to find themselves. We could talk about Plato's Republic when we have more time, but it's kind of like Plato's Republic where the people are trapped in the cave and they let them go. These people step into frustration, they think differently, they think creatively, and they're the people who are going to give us the innovative solutions for our future. James Doolittle said if we have to fight, we should be prepared to do so from the neck up and not the neck down. I don't know what that is.
So what's your day-to-day job?
Can you hear me?
Program.
Hello. Thank you. The sources for my talk today are Bob Kagan's excellent book, Immunity to Change. He'll talk about how to reach higher levels of cognitive complexity, and I also mentioned Berger's excellent work, Changing on the Job. That concludes my presentation. I can stand by for any questions you have.